Well, welcome to another edition of our podcast. Sarah Gorrell and Tracy Shawn, otherwise known as Trump Lady, talking about, and I said, Tracy, to you just now, I cannot come up with an answer for this one. This is Claire's query. She's got in touch with us. And this is whether you can really be lovely all your life and then suddenly change. You've been nice and then it all gets too much. But really, you're nice. You're just sort of having to get something out your system. Tell us more.
Ladies, have a question. I'm not sure if you have covered this topic. I'm 55 and I seem to have a lot of friends and friends of friends whose husbands have cheated after 30 years. I was recently chumped by my husband 3 weeks before Christmas 2022, and that was my D-Day. He told me because the other woman gave him an ultimatum. I know everything is never roses in a relationship that long, but the disrespect of being with someone that long and having grown children and investing in a life with someone was a real shock to the system, and I just wish that he had have broken up with me properly. But no, it's not as fun that way. It's more thrilling to creep around. It's just like they can't stand to be faithful any longer and they want to give it a whirl. The cheating is like, hey, I'm going to try skydiving. Mine said something like, oh my God, this is not me. I've never done anything like this before. I'm actually a really good guy. I'm so sorry it ended like this, with you finding out about my skanky cyclist girlfriend. I moved into a serviced apartment the next day and asked him to hurry up and move into an Airbnb. It took him 5 weeks because it's so hard to work from home in an Airbnb, the poor thing. I booked a mediator, sold my house, and now I have a rental. I'm getting happier, but it's really sad how it all ended overnight because we had some really great years, lots of nice holidays with our kids, and I have now lost his side of the family. It was like coming off a very bad drug. I wanted to kind of throw the possibility around that someone nice can turn nasty. What do you ladies think?
Okay, so to the nice or naughty or nice or nasty question, I think it's the wrong question. I think that the real question is deep versus shallow. And I think if you can abandon your family after 30 years, that you are not very deep. I mean, that it doesn't torture you, that one day you can just go, yeah, bye, it's been nice. Your wife appliance services are no longer needed. You are obsolete. Goodbye. That is, staggering to be able to abandon someone. But it also shows that you have been assuming a deep commitment that doesn't exist. That doesn't make you wrong or bad. This person's been fronting a life for 30 years, but there's a screw loose with this person. The part of the letter I thought was, the message that I thought was interesting was when he said, I'm actually a really good guy. What did you think? I mean, they always think they're splendid, right?
Well, they do. And I knew you'd come up with an answer to this, but I find it really intriguing because as quite often with the letters that you get in, I can't come up with an answer to this because there's an element of me that thinks, okay, 30 years of commitment and raising a family and being there and doing all the right things. Doesn't that count for something? Is that in some way a better person than someone who skips off into the ether after 6 months or 1 year? Or is it worse because they have built up this long lifetime together and all those memories and adult kids and a household and all the joint finances? How can you possibly abandon that after 30 years? I can't work out whether it's nice because they've done the 30 years or really, really nasty because they've done the 30 years. And that is a huge thing to suddenly turn your back on.
It is. And, okay, I have a cynical chump lady brain, but the other part of it is that, yeah, people can conduct double lives for 30 years. I mean, he's had a schmoopy, he's had a mistress because she gave him an ultimatum before Christmas, me or her, and he chose the schmoopy. So for whatever amount of time, the guy's been having an affair. My thought is, and, based on the gazillions of letters and stories I hear and read, is that you don't just wake up one day and become a cheater, like I want to be a trapeze artist or, I want to go skydiving or whatever she compared it to. It's probably pretty experienced at the double life. And that's the really horrific thing is to think that people are that compartmentalized, that deceitful, that that's possible. But it's absolutely possible when you look at the stories. I mean, generally is always worse than you know. I mean, I was, admittedly, I was briefly married, but I was married to a guy who had a double life that went back 20 years. And my husband had a 22-year marriage to a woman that had a double life, most likely going back to the very beginnings of the relationship. And of course, that's the kind of truth that comes out later. You know, in the case of my husband, former business partners told him about being introduced to affair partners, and people came out of the woodwork. And I think you had a similar story. People come out of the woodwork.
I do, you know, so I suppose what you're saying is you're scratching the surface. So Claire's lovely 30-year relationship, that there may have been some scurrilous goings on that weren't quite so apparent.
Yeah. And I think the other part of this, you know, she said this is common, like for her, in her experience. She has other friends going through this. She's in her 50s, you know, and suddenly her husband walks out on her for someone else. And it is kind of a cliche, right? I mean, you know, older man probably hooks up with younger woman, not always, but often, and you're obsolete. Thanks. Onward we go. And there is an element to misogyny to this, I think. I mean, because it is a trope and because it's common, is that, yeah, you're a wife and mother appliance. And then, you know, there's obsolescence. You're not needed any longer, you know, time to trade in for a newer model. And that's when the values clash, right? You think, I'm here for sickness and health. We're going to grow old together. We're going to retire together. I put in all this time. Now I get the payoff. And it's like, nope, I'm going to cash in my chips. Bye-bye. And I think it's interesting the way people look at it, because, and I think this is a general problem in infidelity discourse, is that we conflate rejection with deception. You know, I'm sure people go to her like, oh, you know, that's sad, but we weren't made to be monogamous forever. We weren't supposed to live so long. I mean, whatever the crap people say, you know, like, oh, these things happen, midlife crisis, whatever. Versus what she's saying she's upset about is the deception. And that's the part that people don't get. It's that you invested deeply in this life and somebody faked that commitment to you. They took all the benefits of that commitment and then they bailed. And people just want to look at the superficial rejection. Like, you didn't get asked to the prom, that, oh, you know, it hurts. We all get rejected. Get over it. Versus, no, like, it's you've been defrauded.
I think what I find very difficult, though, is the fact, and it makes it really, really hard to be able to trust someone again, is that you think you know someone, you share a home with them, you share children with them, you share a life with them, and then they can suddenly turn their back on that life after all those years. And how can you ever trust anybody again when the person that you think you know the most behaves in a way that you find so inexplicable after all those years?
Yeah, it's absolutely staggering. It's so traumatic. And I mean, it's part of why I keep the blog going. It's part of why I started the blog, because I think our discourse on this is whack. You know, we don't acknowledge what a grievous loss it is and how traumatic it is and how, frankly, abusive it is. I mean, I'm not saying, you know, you can't divorce people in midlife and gray divorce is a thing, but there are ethical ways to break up with somebody, and cheating on them for years and getting an ultimatum by the mistress is not one of the ways to break up. You know, it is. It's like, how can you trust again? How could you be so wrong about this person? You know, I think part of the reason our discourse is messed up about this is because that is such a horrible thing to contemplate, that kind of vulnerability, that people don't want to go there. That's why it's like the last taboo. I get it. You know, that's your inner circle. That's your intimate. You know, how could I be wrong about this person? How could I have wasted 30 years on this person? I don't have a pat answer for that. I think you have to go on, right? You have to reinvent. You have to gain the life. You got to do all the hard things. You can't keep investing in a fraud, right? You got to move forward.
I think one of the things that helped me, because I think it's astonishingly difficult when somebody that you have trusted so much betrays you. But what you do learn during this is that there are people in your life that you suddenly realize you can trust. Some of the people that you thought were friends will not be friends. They won't support you. They won't be there. But things like my university friends who've been there for me all my life, since I was 18, my school friends, people that I've known for a long time, I know implicitly that I can trust them. And although part of me felt that I'd lost that shared history, that I'd lost that bit of my life and that I'd been being deceived for all of that time, I actually still have those really, really good friends who will always be my good friends and will always be there.
Yeah. It's like a true test, like who shows up and who doesn't, like who gets it and who's there for you and who isn't. I think it is possible to trust again. You trust your friends. You're not living in a bunker. You're not hiding. Like you go out in the world. I think it's possible to bounce back. But it's devastating, right? To lose that legacy, that shared history, all of it that you invested so deeply in.
You don't just lose your past though, you lose your future, don't you? Because if you've got adult children, what you will have been looking for, like you said, you've invested, you want the rewards, you want the nice retirement together, the bringing up, watching your grandchildren come into the world, and all of a sudden you've got to do that with some other woman or other man suddenly appearing which you never ever imagine would happen.
You know what? I think the long arc of this, and I'm not saying all the time, sometimes they really, head off for the sunset and whatever, but the kind of people that are going to put up with you at the end of life, when it's not pretty, when it's chemo appointments or, congestive heart failure or whatever you're dealing with, it's not going to, shallow isn't going to work for you then. Those are the bond. The people who show up for you. And to me, cheaters are exchanging gold for a handful of worthless beans. They're not getting devotion and commitment and, in sickness and health and all the things you commit to. They're getting sparkles. That's what they want. That's what they value. And also, I think it's they have this imaginary idea of how their stock trades. I mean, often, because I get a gazillion stories, it's women too, but men, to be the stereotypical thing, trot off. And then they realize they get dumped or they realize it's not that great and they miss their wife appliance and they circle back. Don't take them back. But it doesn't end well, I really think, especially in a long life, the people who show up they're the good guys. And that pays dividends, having integrity and showing up for people and being invested in your family, it pays off.
I think you're right as well, is there's some misogyny goes on here, because the way that we look at men who replace their wives or partners for a younger version, there's almost a kind of, oh, well done, look at you, you've got yourself a shiny new better model. Whereas if it's the other way round, and if a woman in her 50s trotted off with a 20-odd-year-old man or a 30-odd-year-old man, but there would still be that horror and people saying, oh, for goodness sake, she's ridiculous, it will never ever work.
Yeah. If you're doing everything out in the open and people are consenting and you didn't cheat on someone and you want an age, a big age gap, okay, whatever. I suppose it could work. But yes, the swapping out, for the younger, shinier, it just kind of shows what your values are. It shows you're not that deep. And also, they say you want a purse or a nurse as you get older. I mean, you really think like a young person, like, are they making a great trade here? I mean, do you want to go the distance with the old guy? I don't know. I don't think they're there. I think if they had other age appropriate options, I think it's about money. I mean, that's a stereotype, but
It's such an interesting question, though, isn't it? That whole thing about, this isn't me, right? I've been married for 30 odd years. I've been faithful. I've done it, and now suddenly I'm skipping off into the distance with my affair partner. But I'm nice deep down, and I suppose that's the big question, isn't it? Can you be a good guy if you're prepared to do this, whether it's 2 years down the line or whether it's 30 years down the line?
I'm actually a really good guy. That's what he said.
Can you be a good guy and a cheater? That's the big question, isn't it?
Well, according to this guy, he's a great guy. It depends on who you ask, you know? It depends on what your character is. It depends what, you know, I would say, no, you're not a nice guy. You'd like abandon your family, but he thinks he's splendid. You know, people around him may think he's splendid who know him at a superficial level, and maybe that's all he's capable of, and that's all the kind of relationship they want. And that's okay, right? I mean, I don't, is it okay? But I think it really infuriates chumps who look at this and go, how do people still like him after what he did? You know, because he's not that deep, right? He's not that deep. Nobody's showing up for him in that way. And you want show up people, you want authentic people, you want real people. And those people don't traffic in impression management, right? I'm a really nice guy. That's impression management. You can do this and you think you're splendid. We just have a disconnect, right? We just have a disconnect.
Isn't it funny though, because doing this podcast and you doing your blog as well, what you find is that the ones that are left behind, the sort of the discarded individuals, the people who haven't lived up to their cheaters' expectations, they are the remarkable people. They're the ones that show bravery and resilience. They get up, they get on, and they do the child rearing. You know, the guest we had the other day who found out about the affair during the pregnancy, but she gets on with it, she deals with it, she brings up the kids on her own. And then Claire, who says, right, you know, being abandoned after 30 years, but there we are, I'm going to get on with it, off you go, off you trot, and I'm going to prove that I can manage my life without you. She's incredible.
Yeah, absolutely. It is totally a story of mightiness. And then he complains that, you know, his Airbnb can't work. It's so hard for him. So hard. It's so hard. Look, you know, you got what you wanted, right? I mean, but in terms of like paying dividends later and the chumps turn out well, I wrote about this, but just last weekend I was at a funeral at a celebration of life ceremony, actually in upstate New York, for my uncle Matt. And any readers of the blog have read my Aunt Joy's story about the walls in your house will sing. And she was chumped in her first marriage, and Matt was chumped in his first marriage. His now ex-wife ran off with the town priest. There's that drama. And he was the show up guy who was a single father of two teenagers when it happened. And my aunt had been a single mom for a long time. And they'd been high school sweethearts, and they got remarried in midlife in their early 40s. And then my aunt moved back to her hometown in upstate New York. And then they had 38 years together, the last 14 of which Matt had dementia, and my aunt was his caregiver. So talk about show up love, you know, takes an amazing amount of mightiness to do that. But back to Matt. So not like on paper, not like an extraordinary guy, a really sweet man, a family man, a guy who loved dogs, who loved upstate New York and lakes. He sold insurance, not sparkly, right? Not sparkly. All the people who showed up for him at this, you know, who had funny Matt stories, who loved him. I mean, I just kept thinking, neither one of their exes would ever, they couldn't fill a phone booth with the people who give a shit about them. I mean, I'm not kidding. And Matt had this outpouring of love. And, you know, okay, you're dead, you don't get to see it, but I just think those connections, showing up for people, is what matters. And if it doesn't matter for you, then we don't share the same values, and, you know, we're not going to be in each other's lives. I think that's where you get when this happens to you. This guy left you after 30 years. He can't hang with you. You're not the same kind of people, right? That guy's not a Matt. Matt's actually a really great guy.
So actually, by seeing this memorial for someone who's a really great guy, do you think that in terms of shallow facades, that quite often people who are cheaters have shallow facade friendships as well? So they're not genuine in their primary relationship, but neither are they genuine in any other area of life either.
Totally. I mean, I absolutely think that. If I were to look back at red flags with my cheater, it's that he didn't really have friendships. You know, I mean, he had work friends, you know, he had guys he went to law school with who didn't live nearby, you know, and I kind of thought, well, men, they don't have as many friends, or, you know, if you're divorced, you know, maybe your wife took the friends. I mean, I don't know, I glossed over it, but Yeah, I think real people who are deep have show up friends. They got somebody, right? You know, they might not have a large posse of sparkly people, but they have some true blue people in their life.
Do you find it depressing how many of these individuals there are out there, though? Because your blog's been going for a while now, and over again, I sometimes stumble on letters that people have sent in, and you think, how can that, how can that actually happen? How can someone really behave in that astonishing fashion? And yet they keep coming. These letters keep coming. There are just more and more of these stories.
Sarah, you told the flip flop story. The flip flop story was astonishing. The Cornish tattoo story was astonishing. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, go back and listen to the earlier episodes of this podcast. But like, because you lived it, maybe you don't think it's astonishing, but I'm sure that people look at what your ex put you through and go, oh my God. How could a man go on holiday and bring his mistress on holiday with 4 children? You had 4 children. You were on a family vacation and he brought his fuck buddy. Mic drop, like you win.
And he had 2 Christmases as well, one with us and one with her afterwards. It was quite staggering. And actually, you're right. I look at him now, and I look at the friendships, and it was all very superficial and very, very transient and quite shallow. And one of them, the very, very close friend that he had, who was the one that told me that he had been carrying on when I had a newborn baby. That friendship ended because he borrowed loads of money off of him and never paid him back.
And serves that guy right for knowing that he was a cheater and lending him money. But, okay, it blew up in his face. But, and I think it's a very human mistake, right? We assume the best in people and in the people around us until life tests us, right? We just assume, oh, this guy would show up for me, right? He seems like a solid person. And then life tests you, however that is. It doesn't have to be infidelity. It could be something else. Your mom gets cancer. I don't know, whatever it is. You need a sofa moved. And then they're not there, right? They're not there. And then you realize the depth of the friendship because it's now been tested. I just think that, I try not to untangle the skein, but cheaters are inherently lazy, right? And showing up is work. It's work. It's emotional labor. It can be physical labor. It's work, right? And they would prefer life on the easy setting.
Do you think then if you look back on a relationship, so our caller there, 30 years, disappears into the ether, says he's a nice guy, really? Do you think if she really looks deep into the last 30 years and starts thinking, okay, who did all the hard work here? Was it me doing all the rubbish stuff? Was it him that was taking advantage of this relationship? And actually, I'm sure if she, like we've looked back and you analyze it and you think, actually, it wasn't a joyful relationship. It was me all the time propping it up.
Yeah, I think there's inherent lopsidedness. And that's what I tell people going forward. Always look for reciprocity. You're not saying it's like quid pro quo and you have a scorecard, but look for the person who, if you do something nice for them, it bothers them until they can do something nice back for you. The reciprocity. And I think people get in marriages, they get in long-term relationships, and maybe it felt reciprocal at the beginning, or they were starstruck or lust struck or whatever. But as life goes on, you realize this person does not show up in meaningful ways. It's not reciprocal. But I think if you're someone who believes in family and believes in marriage and believes in your commitments, you'll accept the lopsidedness. You'll work hard because you have the big picture. You value the shared history and the legacy and the things that you're building, air quotes, together. And maybe you think too, oh, well, that's fixable. Or right now I'm doing 100%, but then he's going to get a turn and he's going to do 100%. Just assuming that day will come and then they don't, right? Then it's a terrible shock.
Starting again with that question at the beginning, can you be a nice guy who after all these years, does something nasty, but still a nice guy? No. There was always a weak, shallow individual, and that's the end of it. And
we have answered
cast a rosy glow over him and who he really is.
That's right. That's the answer. He sucks. He's not a nice guy. He might think he's a nice guy. He's not a nice guy.
That's sorted. And we want to do more of that. So we're coming back in September with more of the podcast. And we are getting a lot of questions, a lot of communications coming in. So we're going to delve into some of these in September. One of the ones we're looking at is things like single parenting, being on your own, dealing with the kids and any other issues. So we always welcome, don't we, any sort of communication.
We do, yeah. So if you have a comment or question, or you want to share one of your mighty stories with us, just head to chumplady.com/mighty. And also, if you would please review and subscribe if you like this podcast. Thanks.